Hi, everybody. Today's Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, and our dear friend Patrick Henningsen is here with us. Welcome back, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Nima.
Patrick, let me start with the new escalation in the war in the Middle East, which was the attack on the oil refinery, one of the main oil refineries in Iran, one of the most important ones, which was South Pars. They call it South Pars or Asaluya refinery. And this is a new escalation. And your understanding of this sort of move, it seems that Netanyahu didn't do it, you know, without coordinating with the United States. Axios reported that they were coordinating with the United States before the attack. So the United States knew the attack is coming. They went along with Netanyahu's agenda. And right now they're opening something that Iran has a lot of leverage if tries. And as Iran is hitting Saudi Arabia, as we talk, they're hitting Saudi Arabia and Qatar. How do you see the escalation, and what was the main reason of going that far, which they know how fragile is the situation on their part?
Well, I wouldn't want to second guess what's going on between Israel and the United States. Other than people have to understand that this was intentional. This was intentional. This wasn't an accident. It was intentional. So the question is why? And it seems like the Trump administration would be going basically following Israel, and this gets to the heart of the debate, which is raging, which I've been talking about, and others. But there's a lot of people that say, no, there's no way that Israel is dictating U.S. military actions. There's no way Israel is dictating U.S. Foreign policy decisions. But I don't think that's the case. The evidence, the preponderance of evidence says otherwise. So I don't think anyone's making that argument at this point is not serious argument. There's a lot of people who claim to be geopolitical analysts or, experts, and they're making this argument as if, and what they're doing is playing into the hands of the Israelis and the Americans because they're playing good cop, bad cop. Okay. The U.S. and Israel are like a tag team, okay? And unfortunately, one of those tag team partners has a much greater leverage over the other. The smaller partner, Israel, has greater political leverage over Washington. And that's evidenced, again, it's documented. Simply just look at the campaign contributions of the last election cycle. So the question is, your question, Nima, is why? Why this level of escalation? Because clearly Iran already said beforehand that any attack like this on their oil and gas energy infrastructure is going to mean immediate retaliation against the Gulf states' energy infrastructure. So, that's the lifeblood of the Gulf. These monarchies wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be able to afford to buy all this U.S. military protection if they don't have oil and gas to sell. I mean, it's as simple as that. So what's going on here? And one has to look at this and think, is it a strategy of Israel to destroy the Gulf countries and and then whatever comes in their wake through chaotic upheavals or deprivation, this will be very easily controlled by Israel, either in terms of military threats, blackmail, and in conjunction with the United States. So if they feel that these Gulf families that have been installed initially by the British and then taken over in terms of custodianship by the United States, in terms of controlling these monarchies, it seems like perhaps maybe their time is up. Maybe their time is up, or if they're not showing themselves to be, subservient enough, vassalized enough to the wishes of America, because some stern words have been made by some of the Gulf leaders, specifically from Saudi Arabia, but not only from Saudi Arabia, pretty much, condemning and heavily criticizing the United States starting this war against Iran. because the Gulf states knew what could potentially come. Washington knew what could potentially come, but they felt the Iranians were bluffing, perhaps. Or is it a case that Israel wants to destroy these Gulf countries, weaken them, and ultimately take them over? Because all of them withdrew, for the most part, from the Abraham Accords. Okay, Saudi being the lead actor in that. Israel already attacked Qatar militarily just a few months ago. So that's a big change. So Israel doesn't really respect, or they don't need these Gulf families in charge. They'd much rather put a U.S. or an Israeli puppet in charge, or have the country torn to pieces, and then come in after the dust settles, and then strike up a deal with these Gulf monarchies that if they're not on board with the Abraham Accords, if they're not going to endorse a genocide of the native Palestinian population, then they're gone. They're out. And this is they're getting Iran to potentially do their dirty work for them. Perhaps, maybe that's not the intention of Iran, but that end result will be weakened monarch states in the Persian Gulf. Now, which way that goes in the end, Nima, it's anyone's guess at this point. But that's the only explanation I can come up with here, because this was intentional. This wasn't just they got the wrong target, or they went a little bit overzealous. This is strategic by Israel. They know what's coming after this. And Iran has very little choice. I mean, the only choice Iran has at this point, other than to retaliate in kind, would be to go to the Gulf states like Qatar and said, well, if you're going to allow the Americans and the Israelis to destroy our LNG or natural gas, then you're going to have to supply us with natural gas, and you're going to do it for free. Otherwise, we're going to destroy your supply. They would have to basically extort oil and gas from the Gulf states to keep Iran going. Otherwise, it's going to be in-kind retaliation, which is what we're seeing. I believe this is what we're seeing now today. So, I mean, that's my best explanation, is there's a bigger plan here, and that bigger plan is possibly to throw some of these Gulf monarch families under the bus, the U.S. and Israel. If they cared about them, they wouldn't have started this war.
Yeah.
Simple. So, I mean, we need to start like expanding our view of this and think outside the box, because certainly, the Greater Israel Project is not going to exist with stubborn Gulf Arab states. Simple. No, whether that plan is going to come to fruition or not, whether that's going to work for Israel and the U.S., that's another matter. But we are seeing an intentional move designed to get Iran to strike back at Gulf oil and gas facilities. So it's not like Trump cares about the global economy. In fact, for the U.S., and this is where there's a U.S. advantage here, is the beneficiary of this is going to be U.S. oil and gas companies. They will dominate. Russia will also be a beneficiary, but I think that's a secondary matter. But first and foremost, it will be the U.S. So that's, if you want to look at it from that point of view, that's a continuation of the U.S.-led operation to destroy the Nord Stream pipeline, which then created a dependency in Europe on overpriced, extortionately priced U.S. LNG, liquefied natural gas, into the Northern European market. Now you have the Southern European market cut off from Qatari LNG supplies. And the U.S. believes that it can just ramp up production and price. And maybe Trump thinks he's going to pay off the $40 trillion national debt this way, by basically sucking the life out of the rest of the planet and getting everybody hooked on overpriced U.S. oil and gas. I mean, they might feel they can temporarily share the market with the U.S. and then deprive China and South Korea and Japan, maybe discipline the Middle East a little bit, maybe get them to buy U.S. oil and gas at extortionate rates. I mean, so from that point of view, Nima, that's what this looks like. So we can look at it from the Israeli point of view of reshaping the Middle East for subservient client states, obedient client states, and then the U.S. benefit would be to increase U.S. demand for U.S. oil and gas at substantially higher prices. That's what it looks like to me, Nima. That's my best educated guess.
I think that makes sense because you remember when Donald Trump went to the Middle East and the Israelis were so much afraid how much leverage these Arab states would have on Donald Trump because they were bribing Donald Trump left and right, and that's why they thought that these guys are getting, so much power in Washington. You remember with the military cooperation with Qatar, they were somehow, you know, so much against it in Israel, and right now the war is doing everything for them. And the problem is, Patrick, that it doesn't seem that the United States sees these countries as sovereign nations. They see them as some sort of, territory with some rich people there, and is that gonna influence the leadership, or they're gonna be in the same position as they were before, as they are right now, and they will be in the same sort of mindset.
There's two ways you can. This is a very important question you may hear. Okay, this is the nature of the Gulf states, their ability to rule in their respective territories, and then what is their exact relationship with the West, with the U.S. in particular. So one way you can look at it is that the United States provides military protection to keep the families in power, to keep the families in power. And as long as the U.S. keeps those families in power, they can control those states. They can also harvest the oil revenue in terms of the petrodollar, so bought and sold in U.S. dollars. And the quid pro quo has been since the early 1970s that those Arab states would then reinvest the dollars to buy U.S. Treasury bills, U.S. debt, basically pump up Wall Street. Okay, there's whole institutions that have been built on the back of this petrodollar, like Citibank is a good example. Powerhouse on Wall Street. It pretty much has been inflated and built up by Arab petrodollars. Okay, major institutions that actually exert a lot of control over the U.S. government policies. And Citibank handpicked Obama's cabinet in 2008. Okay, that shows you now how that circular relationship works. So that's one way you can look at it. Okay, and then with that money, they also buy U.S. weapons, U.S. jets, okay, U.S. missile defense, all sorts of U.S. things, and the U.S. pretends to provide protection for those Gulf states. So that's one. But to me, since the petrodollar is still it still helps prop up the U.S. world reserve currency. The United States still needs it, but in terms of direct oil sales from the Gulf, in terms of the U.S., it's less and less. It's a diminishing amount over years, and while Europe still buys a substantial amount from them, well, definitely in terms of LNG from Qatar, in terms of straight up oil sales, it's not what it used to be. The Far East is the main beneficiary of supplies from the Persian Gulf. So, and Iran is part of that equation as well. But what you have to the real relationship right now is that these Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and the other Gulf, Bahrain, okay, they spend their money. They're just used to spending money on U.S. military gear, and it makes them look tough. It also buys them a lot of favor from the U.S. in terms of the political and from the defense industry, and also from banking and finance, and it brings them into the Western game in a big way. But it doesn't provide any protection for them, not really. It's a protection racket. and the U.S. is really extorting kind of just, you know, overprivileged hereditary Arab monarchs. They use them. They're milking them. They're milking them for as much money as they can get out of them to buy the latest F-35 or the latest tank or the latest defense systems, or Patriot missile batteries or whatever. They know that they're a soft touch. They also know that, the U.S.'s strategy has been to be aggressive towards Iran for years, and then they would use Iran's sort of aggressive posture back at Israel and the U.S. They would use that and tell the Arab countries, look, Iran's a threat. Iran's a threat. You need to arm up. We're going to provide you with this. And you can't even fire a gun you buy from the United States without the U.S. giving you approval. You can't fly any air missions. You can't light up your Patriot missile batteries. You can't do anything. It's all U.S. technician teams, U.S. soldiers, U.S. staff, U.S. maintenance. Everything is U.S. You have no independent military at all if you buy from America. Nothing. You're basically just an outsourced franchise of the Pentagon. So politically, you have no independence at all. So they're stuck in this trap because the leadership was very short-sighted, very corrupt, and not very smart. And just to prove to you, the culmination of this, Nima, was during Barack Obama's second term. And Barack Obama and a young MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who was probably only 32 or 33 years old in 2015, okay, they convinced Saudi Arabia. I think he was defense minister. I can't remember his actual position at that time. They convinced Saudi Arabia under Obama to attack Yemen and to launch a full-scale war against the neighboring country of Yemen. Of course, we know why that was. It was really a U.S. and Israeli operation, and using the UAE and getting them to pay for a lot of it, but to partition Yemen, not just because of the oil in the south, but also to isolate Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement, and also to reclaim control of the Bab el-Mandeb Straits and the entire Gulf of Aden. So it was a geopolitical move. Okay, but what that showed was that they wanted to get Saudi Arabia to lead in that war. It was all U.S. planes. Everything was U.S. There's even reports that the United States were flying the missions, but they had Saudi flags on U.S. jets. I mean, and they got other countries to get involved in this coalition, and that was the peak of this arrangement. And that went on for 8 years, 9 years. It started in March 2015, and it really didn't end until probably around 2023. It was being wound down, but it's still actually going. So that shows you these countries have zero independence, zero sovereignty. All of these royal families serve at the pleasure of the United States and ultimately Israel. Because if Israel wants to rub any of these out, they're gone in 48 hours. They're out. And any one of these, Israel can do it for the United States, or the U.S. could do it. But the U.S. doesn't want to be seen to do that publicly, so they can get Israel to do some of their dirty work there. So maybe this is a case of what's happening here. So all of this facade is falling apart. This facade, it's now clear. The U.S. is, because of what Israel and the U.S. did, they drew fire to all of these Gulf countries. That these foolish, I'll be kind, foolish Gulf monarchs were paying billions of dollars in protection from the U.S. And look what it got them. No protection. They couldn't protect Qatar from Israel. And then drawing fire, the whole facade of this phony relationship. It's a predatory relationship. The U.S. preys on these naive, spoiled, overprivileged Gulf hereditary families. They use Iran to threaten them, to create a case for them to buy more arms. They cash in on the stock market. They get their petrodollars in New York. I mean, it's such a scam. And the U.S. has been running this scam with the Gulf Arabs since this since for a long time, but really since the early 70s, and it's just gotten worse and worse. They keep doubling down. Now look at it; it's a mess. And as people in the U.S. and the Gulf, they're thinking, well, let's just wipe the board now. I mean, or in Israel, in the U.S., let's just wipe the board now. We'll put new governments in. We'll find other royals we can, there'll be a palace coup. Watch. And they'll take over. And those will become colonies of Israel and the U.S. That's where they're heading. There's no way they'll allow an Arab nationalist movement to take power in any of these countries, like even Bahrain. But that's probably not going to happen anyway because they can be crushed immediately. Any sort of political movement can be crushed. Israel will assassinate every last one of them, like they're trying to do with the Iranians now. So, sorry to paint a very dark picture here, but we're looking at potential paradigm shifts, major upheavals in the Gulf as a result of what we're seeing here. I cannot see it coming back to where it was before. I just can't see it.
Patrick, the Strait of Hormuz is continuing to be one of the greatest challenges that the Trump administration and Israelis are facing in this war against Iran. And Donald Trump is doing everything to push, to somehow force the Europeans into the conflict. It doesn't mean that Europeans are not part of the war. They're part of the war on the defensive front. They're defending, they're doing everything for the United States and Israel right now, but they don't wanna go on offensive, particularly when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. Because I think one of the reasons is what you've just mentioned with the case of Nord Stream pipeline. They have sabotaged Nord Stream pipeline, and if not the Middle East, if they make a war in the Middle East on the Strait of Hormuz, which they know that this is not a viable choice for them to go that far, because nobody would be able to open the Strait of Hormuz. I think the calculation on their part is this: what is your understanding of the Europeans, sort of move, sort of reaction to what Donald Trump is asking for?
Well, he's not really getting a lot of uptake from the Europeans. Not really, in terms of their involvement. Italy, the UK, France. They've all got troops deployed and attached to the various U.S. bases constantly, and that's because these European countries need to be involved in everything to have operational readiness. So they're always going to be like attached at the hip, even as in a minor role, but it sort of justifies the internal military industrial complex of those respective European countries who are also NATO members. So it's just part of them being involved. The British always have to be involved in every single raid, coup, war. They have to just be there next to the United States, because otherwise their forces won't get any experience. And then that's going to hurt their ability to get military budgets the following year. So this is just a game that's constantly being played. But in terms of getting them to come in to help open the Straits of Hormuz, why would Donald Trump be asking that? If the U.S. has the most powerful military in the world, if they're winning, if they destroyed the Iranian Navy, if they destroyed their Air Force, and they destroyed all of their missiles or half their missiles or whatever Trump's claiming this particular afternoon, or that particular breakfast session, whatever the case may be, why would they need Europeans to help? Why not just call Israel and come have Israel has a navy, they've got ships, they can come do it. Why not? They're their greatest friend and ally. Because the US have done this very cynically. Trump wants to draw in the Europeans to create a target in order to diffuse the tension, and also if it's just the U.S. and Israel, that's just a big giant target. That's just going to motivate the Iranians even more, and then that's going to inflame the situation even more. So they want to bring in the Europeans with this idea that Iran may not want to attack a European naval vessel for fear of drawing in a European power to ally with the U.S. and Israel. But that's exactly what Trump wants to do. He wants to use the Europeans as shields. Yeah. And so there's some European countries that are smart enough to see this. There's others that aren't so bright, but they all have one problem. It's that they are completely subservient and vassalized to Washington. And it's very hard for them to get out of that role. So what Trump will do is to offer them some kind of. He's always trying to use every situation to leverage some transaction that has to do with another sort of separate situation. In the case of Europeans, that those separate situations would be like bargaining chips, like Ukraine, for instance, like some kind of a NATO arrangement. He's already trashed NATO, and he's blamed the European countries. He said to them at the press conference this week, he says, "Well, I don't understand why the European countries don't want to help. I mean, we didn't have to come and help with Ukraine, but we did." No, the U.S. actually started the Ukraine war. They launched the coup and the civil war under Obama in 2014, and Donald Trump himself flooded the Ukraine with weapons and lethal aid during his first term, and he also sabotaged the Minsk peace process during his first term. His government did that. Okay, so that was the war wouldn't have happened had Trump not done those things, and Obama also as well. So the U.S. as a whole, the United States, is responsible for the Ukraine war, 100%. They've led it, they've driven it, they created it, they dragged the Europeans into it to create a proxy war, to create a threat to Europe, so that the Europeans were then motivated to defend themselves. This is all manipulation by the U.S. Okay, so Trump trying to play that card in one way, this is good, because hopefully it'll wake up some of these Europeans and these sort of bureaucrats and technocrats that are completely lost and drowning in their own propaganda. Okay, but what Trump will also do is perhaps leverage this to get some sort of a uh, deal on Greenland with Denmark, for instance, or to be less aggressive with Greenland. Who knows? But this White House will try anything. They'll try anything. It's a gaggle of absolute degenerates, just absolute white collar criminals who fancy themselves as international gangsters at this point, who have no regard for U.S. law, U.S. constitutional law, international law, any treaty or convention, United Nations Charter, nothing. Nothing. They've trashed it all. They make fun of it. They deride it. And they thumb their nose at anybody that's trying to raise any kind of a humanitarian or some sort of human rights or moral argument. They don't care. This is a rogue state now. It's a rogue hegemon. It's no longer a superpower. To be a superpower, you have to have the cooperation of partners. You have to lead through institutions and through cooperation and trust. And Donald Trump inherited that, but Joe Biden did tremendous damage to this, by the way. But Donald Trump still inherited a superpower. What Donald Trump's going to leave after 4 years is not a superpower. It's a rogue hegemon. And that's an empire in steep, steep decline. That's what Trump will have left if he makes it through 4 years. I don't think at this rate he may not. Some people in the U.S. will have to, call in their better angels to invoke the 25th Amendment, that he's not mentally fit to be president. I mean, what we're witnessing now and what's being said and done, it's unbelievable. It's doing irreparable damage to the future of the United States, and is risking a full-blown third world war, because there are other powers in the world that are looking at this and saying, actually, the United States is threatening us now. The U.S. has become, and Israel as his partner, have become an existential threat to the world now, on a scale that we have never seen before. If you think about Japan and Germany, yes, well, more so Japan in the Pacific theater, in terms of its expansionist, imperial, designs and strategies and so forth. I mean, it's significant. It was significant, but with Germany, fairly localized. I mean, aside from Eastern Europe and the Russian front, a little bit in North Africa, United States is projecting this uh, continuously around the globe. You know, they're talking about three front, four front, major conflagrations they want to manage simultaneously, with the help, of course, of Israel. And Israel has its own ambitions to dominate the Middle East with the Greater Israel Project. And maybe to do that, they need to weaken the United States a little bit, and that's actually being done right now. There's different ways we can look at this, Nima, but you know, how this is going to, how Iran fits into this equation. It really just comes down to a war of attrition, resilience, the possibility of deterrence. If the U.S. and Israel have depleted their interceptor stocks and military ammunitions sufficiently that it might lead to some kind of a ceasefire or pause or some sort of armistice in all of this. Uh, that's that's about all we can say at this point, I think.
Patrick, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, recently the foreign minister of Iran, Araqchi, he had an interview in which, with Al Jazeera, he said that they're defining the mechanism of the Strait of Hormuz. You know, they're trying to. It's not going to get back to the same situation it had before. It seems that Iran is seriously considering how to manage the Strait of Hormuz. And there is an article in the Financial Times that argues that Iran's actions in the Strait of Hormuz show the reality of multipolar economic warfare. For decades, the United States dominated sanctions and used financial pressures as a strategic weapon. Now, other powers like India and like Iran and China can use similar tools to respond in response to escalations. This is literally what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, I don't know if they were planning for this, but the United States forced them to take this new position. And how do you see the management of the Strait of Hormuz on the part of Iranians as time goes by, when in the aftermath of this war or during this war?
Well, that all depends, Nima, about firstly, the production capacity of the Gulf states, of Iran in oil and gas. What's going to be the production capacity? Because as it stands, the U.S. and Israel can bring the Iranian production capacity to near zero if they choose. Okay. Now, that's not to say Iran won't be able to also get supplied from other sources. They certainly can, and they can do some domestic supply themselves. But in terms of their export capacity, that can be severely damaged. Okay, and this is why Iran also wanted to pursue civilian nuclear power strategy, because they knew that their petroleum resources and this production capacity could be targeted either through sanctions, or through other means, which we're seeing now. So that's why they wanted a diverse portfolio in terms of energy, and that makes perfect sense. That's why the U.S. is targeting their civilian nuclear. It's not because of weapons. It's because it provides an outlet in the event that, so it would allow them to power cities, to power their industries and so forth. This is why the U.S. strategically attacked Germany's nuclear power and convinced Germany, by co-opting and infiltrating the so-called Green Movement in Germany, the Green Party, got them to shut down their nuclear fleet. Very clever. And then they destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, cut off their gas. So it left Germany with nothing, left Germany with coal, and Germany has to pay carbon indulgence tax for firing up any of their coal plants. They're paying that. They're paying extra, let's call it Uncle Sam tax, for taking expensive U.S. LNG across the Atlantic. So the U.S. has made Germany bankrupt, brought it down, their economy down, and then dependent on U.S. energy, and they have no nuclear power. I mean, the Germans are just stupid. I mean, it's just the most idiotic move by successive German governments, maybe in modern history. Just like no regard for their own sovereignty. You can't be sovereign unless you're energy independent. If you're energy dependent, more than 50% of your energy, you're not really sovereign. You then have to do a lot of negotiations and trading and to maintain some independence. But ultimately, you're going to be dependent. And so that you're going to have good diplomatic relations with your neighbors if you can't do that. So it is the future of the region. If the Arabs aren't producing, then what is the Straits of Hormuz at that point? It's the Persian Gulf could become a dead lake compared to what it has been in the last 50 years. So we have to look at that situation. Now look at Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline to Yanbu in the Red Sea, the petrol line. They're looking that this is a potential, pressure release valve to the situation, but that's not going to provide 8 million barrels of oil per day. And that's the estimated shortfall of the Persian Gulf right now, 8 million per day to the global supply. And so that's why the International Energy Agency announced this great release of 400 million barrels of oil reserves. That's basically a month and a half. It's a month and a half. It's nothing. It's not a solution to anything. It's an act of desperation. And so the most that Saudi can ship to the Red Sea is probably right now, in terms of the capacity of that pipeline and the processing on the end at the port, you're talking about 1.5, 1.7 million barrels a day, maximum current capacity for those facilities. They'd have to do serious upgrades to that system to get it up to where it could do maybe 4 or 5 million barrels per day. And they're probably working on that right now. But guess what? That same port in Saudi on the Red Sea coast has been attacked by Ansar Allah, by the Houthis previously. It's completely within the range of the Yemenis. So it's another front in the war that's potentially opened up here. How can they manage all these fronts? This is a disaster. So, I mean, until the Gulf Arabs pull their finger out and realize and prioritize their own existence and the welfare of the region, of the future of their people, and not their bank accounts in New York, and not whatever deals they've got going on the back end with Israelis and AI and all the rest of it, then the situation for them is terminal. It's terminal. The U.S. is very happy to knock them offline. They probably believe they can survive for a while, and they're going to make so much money in terms of oil and gas from America. But America will bankrupt the rest of the world through inflation, through squeezing on supplies and using leverage. Imagine what Trump would do if the Gulfs were offline. What sort of racketeering do you think threats you're going to see from the U.S.? Look what they're doing to Cuba. They won't even allow Mexico and Venezuela to give fuel to Cuba, so he's starving the country. Famine, no problem. Mass death, no problem. We're doing it because we're fighting the communists. I mean, it's just the level that America's at right now. This is the lowest the United States has ever been in its history of its country. Right now, lower than Vietnam, because at least with Vietnam they had the fake excuse that they were battling communism. They at least had this ideological excuse within the framework of a Cold War, and to some degree that could be seen as somewhat legitimate because this was a nuclear arms race between the Soviet Union and America. So there was this existential threat looming in the background, if you will. I mean, so they sort of had that as a type of an excuse. What have they got now? What's the menace now that the U.S. is fighting? Is it the menace they're fighting is that they're not going to be able to dominate everything going forward? They might have to share the cutting edge of civilization with China. Is that the big threat to the U.S. You can't sell that. You could sell a Cold War. You could sell communism. You could sell to your own people, and you could probably sell to the world, half the world back then. They have nothing to sell now but intimidation, racketeering, protection rackets, fear, uh, just open threats of annihilation, threats of ethnic cleansing, siege warfare. That's what the U.S. is selling right now. And Israel's been selling that for 75 years to the Palestinians and to the region. Look at what Israel's doing to Lebanon. They're taking out city blocks in a premier metropolitan city in West Asia, Beirut. Do you see anybody pushing back from Europe against this? Do you see anybody standing up in Congress? No, they're all for it. We are in an age of brutality right now. This is an age of savagery right now. And it's not because the U.S. is savage. It's not because Israel is brutal and barbaric. It's the reason it's happening is because no country will stand up to oppose it, not even rhetorically, not even diplomatically. Russia and China might have something to say about it, but it's nothing at the moment. At the moment, it's Iran versus the world, with some assistance from the Chinese and the Russians. In terms of intelligence, maybe some military coordination, some cooperation. But besides that, it's Iran versus the world at this moment. I mean, so what do you think the logical outcome of this is going to be? It's not going to be good for the Gulf, I can tell you right now.
Yeah, I think, Patrick, comparing the Persian Gulf to what's going on, what has been happening in Ukraine, and basically the problems out of Ukraine for the Europeans. Europeans were somehow suffering for 4 years of the conflict in Ukraine because of what has happened between, for example, Germany and Russia, the sabotage of Nord Stream pipeline, and this sort of animosity, sort of nonsense hatred toward Russia. And but the problem when it comes to the Middle East is deeper than that. Europe has a lot of problems considering the energy, but when it comes to the Persian Gulf, you see the problem is everything. They don't have food, they don't have water. If this escalation continue, and these escalations continue, and you're gonna see desalinations being hit, the oil production being hit, and everything. The state gonna disappear.
Mm. There's no way back. There's no way back because if desalinization plants get hit, then obviously they can't sustain life. You probably have mass migration, probably to Europe. Those people, and they have money, by the way. They've still got money, so that money can buy them a ticket to Europe and the most expensive properties in Paris, London, Madrid, Barcelona, Rome, etc., Swiss Alps, France, Germany, whatever, United States. So these people will leave, and the slave labor that they've employed from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India, Philippines, they'll go back home. They'll go back home. So I mean, the region will just become a shell of its former self. But look, why do all these countries in these Gulf states exist? They're basically they're countries attached to U.S. bases. So the U.S. and Israel will just move in. They'll move in. They'll fix the desalinization plants and they'll rebuild it for themselves. That's their plan. That's their idea. If they can't have it, they're going to wreck it and then they're going to take it. So, but Iran is standing in the way because that doesn't work for Iran's regional security architecture. I've been saying this for years, but and so have the Iranians, by the way, that the Middle East needs a new security architecture. It needs to be created by the Middle East, not by America, not by Europe, by the Middle East. It needs a Middle East-led, West Asian-led security architecture that doesn't depend on the U.S. or anybody, foreign countries like that. Not even Russia, not even China. It's for the region. and they manage it themselves, and it's for their benefit. And so that's what needs to happen. But obviously, the U.S. might be okay with that. Israel might be okay with that as long as Iran is not part of that security architecture. So we have a fundamental major problem here. So I'm telling you, this is you're looking at all out total warfare right now. And what Israel did in terms of attacking the South Pars gas field, bad news for Qatar. Bad news. They're very worried now. Qatar is they're panicking. You're going to start to see a flight of capital from these countries like you haven't seen before, especially in the coming month in the spring. You're going to see a flight of U.S. corporations, Western companies. It's already begun in Dubai. And likewise, the Gulf are going to withdraw their DFI, direct foreign investment, into Western countries and businesses, or they're just going to pack up, leave, and go offshore, and literally they'll suck the liquidity and assets out of those areas, and they're going to relocate that capital somewhere else, maybe in China. Who knows? Maybe in the U.S. Maybe Trump will get some. This is all at war. What Israel did by killing Ali, or the head of security, Larjani, they then announced after that, Nima, and also killing the head of Iranian intelligence, one of their intelligence heads. They announced after that they are now going to target all Iranian officials. So they're going to regard every politician, every government official as a terrorist, and they're going to hunt them down. They just said that today. Our policy, we're going to hunt them down. So they're trying to destroy the Iranian state, the country, like they've done, and try to destroy any possible negotiators, any possible diplomats. They will go for everybody. And then they'll point to Iran and say, look, we don't have anyone to negotiate with. No, because you murdered them all. That's what Israel did to Lebanon. It's what they're doing to Palestinians. And it's what they'll do to whatever the target country. They did it in Iraq, and they've done it. They're doing this with Iran, continue to do it with Iran. Now they're going to ramp it up. If they can't hit mass civilian targets and kill, Israel would love to slaughter Iranians and kill them en masse like they did to the native Palestinian population. They would like nothing more to do that. The only problem is they're not going to be able to cultivate any political capital in the West anymore if they continue this type of mass murder policy. So instead, what Israel is going to do is just say, well, these are going to be targeted assassinations because Iran is a terrorist state. Ergo, any official who holds any office is a terrorist, and we're going to kill them. And they just announced that policy today. This is total warfare. You can't come back from this. It's going to be annihilation on one side or the other, or both. That's where this is going to end. And it's very likely that world powers will have to be drawn in to stop it or to help declare who's going to be a winner for the betterment of the rest of the world. The axis of evil powers right now are the United States and Israel. That is clearly, from historical perspective, looking at how wars start, like the Second World War is an example. The aggressors are the U.S. and Israel. That's the Axis powers, and you'll have allied powers who will be forming probably in a coalition allied with Iran and other countries. So, the Gulf states need to decide what side of they want to be on in this story, because right now they're with the Germans and the Italians. In World War II, they're with the Axis powers. And tremendous amount of damage, tremendous amount of lives lost as a result of these world wars. Tremendous damage. And borders get redrawn at the end of it. And their borders will be redrawn. These Gulf states can kiss their little fiefdoms goodbye. If they're going to commit to the road they're currently on, which is I believe is probably going to be the losing gambit. They do have some power, only just, and not for very long, but they do have power and influence now. If they choose to bandwagon together for the betterment of the region rather than the family's own personal interests. U.S. has been playing them. The British, the U.S. have been playing. The Israelis have been playing these family cliques. They've been playing them so well over the years, manipulating them, getting them to do things against their own interest, getting them to fight wars against their neighbors. I mean, it's unbelievable how easily manipulated these Gulf families have been. Now you can see the whole thing is falling to pieces. And them throwing their Arab brothers and sisters under the bus, throwing the Palestinians under the bus for decades and decades is finally caught up to them. And now their very existence is under serious question right now. And it's their own fault because they chose to go to look west rather than look east, and they chose against their own Arab brothers and sisters and neighbors. They chose London, Paris, and New York over Beirut, Jerusalem, and Tehran, Baghdad. So and Damascus, Cairo. They chose the West. And this is the result of it now. It's coming to fruition. It's coming to a big, big culmination, big, big climax now.
Patrick, since the assassination of Said Hassan Nasrallah, many people were arguing basically in the mainstream media that the axis of resistance is somehow getting weaker and Hezbollah doesn't exist anymore. The Assad regime is gone. The Yemenis are under some sort of control from the United States. Iran is weakened as a result of all of this happening. And right now, with the war happening, the main war is happening. What Netanyahu was wishing for all his, for more than 20 years, he was wishing for this moment. They're in it. And we have the axis of resistance. Lebanon is just targeting the southern part of Israel. They have never targeted that part of Israel before. It shows that it doesn't matter. They're not. There is no sign of weakness, in my opinion, so far from what we've seen from Lebanon. And on the ground, they're fighting Israelis as well. That's why Israel is asking for 540,000 new reservists joining the army in Israel. I don't know how trained they are. That's a big question there. And the other thing is that so far we see some sort of coordination between Iran, Hezbollah, and Hezbollah in Iraq. Yemenis are not in the fight right now. It seems that how the axis of resistance feeling right now, they don't need Yemen to join. And it doesn't show that the axis of resistance was weakened. In my opinion, this war against Iran is totally a manifestation of what the axis of resistance is for the whole Arab nations.
Yeah. No. What this shows is that the leader of the axis of resistance is Iran, and the Arab countries are following their lead. Iran set the example. No other country had the courage to strike at Israel. Only Iran did, and also Hezbollah. But Hezbollah doesn't have the level of capabilities and resources that Iran has. It's the local militia of South Lebanon. They are very good fighters. They fought bravely in Syria. They defeated ISIS, al-Nusra in Syria, and they fought bravely against the Israelis and defeated them in 2006. But Israel has basically changed the game, because the difference between then and now is back in 2006 or in previous years, it wasn't acceptable to kill civilians just casually, kill them by the tens of thousands. And Israel has removed that prohibition in warfare. And the United States has endorsed this. And the United States has enabled it and also partnered with Israel in a genocide, you see. So that changes. This is not to the advantage of Hezbollah or any other country, because all these other countries now have to think about, any action they take in terms of attacking or counterattacking against the Israelis might mean that, tens of thousands, 50,000, maybe more, maybe hundreds of thousands could potentially die as a result of their actions. That's a lot of weight on the shoulders of, a group like Hezbollah. So it's kind of like real extreme blackmail by the Israelis and the Americans. So if you dare to touch us, we're going to wipe out tens of thousands of your people, because that's how we do business. Bashar al-Assad had to make that calculation every day in Syria, but he was criticized by the war hawks and the, axis on the internet of not being tough enough against the Israelis. Well, it's easier for you to say that, but Israel can come and take out a city block and kill 20,000 people like it's nothing, like they just had, finished breakfast. They have no moral compunction in terms of killing Arabs. Israel doesn't care. The United States doesn't care either. The only reason the U.S. cares is because it might hurt their ability to sort of, participate and do deals with some of their allies or other countries if they're seen to be too much, killing too many people, too many civilians. That's the only thing that restrains the Trump administration. It's just, it's a little bit of the reputation they're clinging on to there. So, in terms of the axis, Nima, Syria, the breaking down the Syrian government and collapsing the Assad government, that was the bridge that would supply and support Hezbollah, but also it held the high ground of Mount Hermon and the part of the Golan Heights. Okay, those are now lost because the U.S. and the Israelis installed an Al-Qaeda terrorist government in Damascus, which Donald Trump invited to the White House. Former deputy head of ISIS, founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria, al-Sharar, aka al-Jilani. So they put the black flag flying over Damascus to block the bridge, to isolate Hezbollah, but also to create a corridor for attacking Iran, for Israel via Iraqi Kurdistan, and also to prevent to weaken the Iraqis so they can't cooperate with the Syrian government and the Lebanese, and specifically the Hashd al-Shabi. But as you said, Nima, the Hashd al-Shabi has not gone away. Hezbollah has not gone away, despite all the attacks, despite having their leaders murdered. The Hashid's commander, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, the Quds forces, General Qasem Soleimani, Hassan Nasrallah, this General Secretary of Hezbollah, all assassinated, all killed. But the groups are still there. They're still fighting. And guess what? They're probably going to be mobilizing a lot more young people to fight for their cause now. That's not going to be a problem for them. So, and Iran is the same with the IRGC, with Iranian society. Now see the true evil of the U.S. and Israel. The young generation see it. They're not going to have any problem recruiting for the next generations. So the Israelis and Americans are looking at the population as the enemy now. That's why you're seeing the targeting of civilians. The Israelis view the general population as a threat because they believe, the Israelis in their kind of criminal mind, and the U.S. too, the Trump administration, believe that these populations will produce resistance. So therefore, we must target the population. We need to kill them. The U.S. and Israel are taking Western society and civilization. They're winding the clock back 500 years, back to medieval times. This is medieval mentality. This is even pre-colonial. This is just straight up medieval barbarism of rogue, corrupt city-states and kings. Mass siege warfare. This is the norm. Look at what they're doing to Cuba. That's medieval siege warfare. No regard for human life whatsoever. And the cowards in the U.S. Congress and Senate have nothing to say about it because in their feeble little minds, they think it's somehow justified because there's an evil communist government in Havana, as if it's a threat to the United States. What's Cuba ever done to the U.S.? Nothing. And look what the U.S. is doing now. They're abusing the Cuban people. Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, laying siege to an entire country, threatening anybody who will give them aid with the intent to destroy the society, to kill people. They want famine. They want it. They call it maximum pressure. And where's the opposition in the U.S. government? Where's the opposition from the U.S. media? Is America that immoral now in 2026 that they can't look at this 90 miles off their coast and see how fundamentally, you know, evil this is? It's satanic. The level of abuse. I mean, this is just and the European countries as well. They're okay with it. Forget about South America. They've all been threatened. The U.S. have said we'll come in and kidnap. We will take your head of state and throw them in a jail in New York. So keep your mouth shut. And if you want to bring oil to the Cubans, we'll take your tanker. Thank you very much. We'll keep the oil and we'll sell it and keep the money. Thank you very much. That's where we're at right now. That's where we're at. And if people don't really understand and appreciate the depths of the depravity at this current time in history, and see it for what it is, and act accordingly to do something to stop it, and there's still a window to stop this politically. If they don't take this opportunity now, who knows what's going to happen on the back of this? They're forcing a third world war. They're forcing it and making it happen.
Patrick, before wrapping up, we know that for many hours since Donald Trump took power, was elected in the United States, we were talking about Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel. These are people that can do something in the administration. These are good people, but it seems as time went by, we've learned that these people are not going to do anything. But finally, someone in the Trump administration has decided to resign, that nobody was talking about him. We have never considered him as a, good character within the Trump administration that would do something with the policies of the Trump administration, would go against these sort of policies. And whose name is, Joe Kent. He's the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He resigned because of in protest against the war on Iran. And how we know how important the domestic policy is for whatever the United States is doing outside of the United States. How much of importance does it have, in your opinion? And how is that going to change? Because we know the Democrats, for their own reasons, not for what Donald Trump, for their own reasons, they want to, go after Donald Trump. But this sort of movement, which comes from within the Republican Party, they don't want it. This guy was involved in these endless wars in the Middle East. He lost his wife in Syria. He knows what he's talking about. What do you make of it?
I think from a symbolic point of view, it's hugely important, even if he's the only one to resign. And he might be the only one to resign because everybody else is being threatened right now. You better believe it. The word has gone down the chain of command from Trump, from Pete Hegseth, from everybody, that they're threatening to destroy, to ruin anybody that follows in the footsteps of Joe Kent. Simultaneously, they're promising them riches, fame, and rewards should they stay loyal to this administration. So Joe Kent represents probably the elite, the best of the U.S. Armed Forces. I mean, look at his resume is unparalleled in terms of combat deployments. Elite units like the Texas Rangers, Green Berets, etc. So he's not an easy person to attack. Donald Trump tried to insult him. Is what Trump does when anybody ever breaks ranks. He calls them a loser. He attacks their wife. He makes fun of them. If they have a family member that's dying of cancer, Donald Trump will make fun of the person that's dying. And he's just a disgusting. No, I mean, the things that Trump has done, attacking Thomas Massey over his dead wife, or his current wife. I don't know, but it's just disgusting. There's no limits for Trump in what he'll do to attack somebody that he views as being disloyal. He'll, it's so, but he can't do this with Joe Kent, because if he does, he's going to alienate all of the SEAL Team 6 guys, all of the sort of special forces guys. And the special forces guys are the real leaders. They have all the podcasts. Joe Kent was CIA paramilitary. He was a para for the CIA. Well, there's a lot of guys who were working for the CIA in the military capacity that all have the leading podcasts, the top radio shows. They're the guests on Fox that come on. Donald Trump, if he attacks Joe Kent in a vicious and rude, crass way that Trump usually does, because that's his nature, okay, because he's like mentally unstable, narcissist type, typical psychological profile, very fragile ego for somebody that's that powerful and famous. You'd think he'd be above that, but he's not. So he was hurt badly by this resignation. You could see Trump was completely disheveled during the press conference when asked about it. He had to think twice. He felt constrained. He couldn't come out and call Joe Kent a loser and a coward and all the things that Trump would like to call him. But if you read Joe Kent's letter, it's very measured. It's very, very straight, analytical. You could see he's somebody who values his professionalism. I might have written it slightly different, but in general, if I was in that position, I would write something very similar to what Joe Kent wrote. But he's kind of blown the whistle on the fraud, the intelligence fraud. And what Joe Kent's letter is pointing to as well is not just at Trump, but it exposes the complete fraud of Tulsi Gabbard, who's allegedly the director of national intelligence, but has allowed all the fake Israeli intelligence to be stovepiped into the US system to prepare for and to justify ultimately a war. So the DNI, Tulsi's position, they shouldn't even have this department anyway. This was a creation post 9/11, like so many bad creations like the Department of Homeland Security in 2002, 2003. It's meant to be an objective backstop, so to have an independent final curation of incoming intelligence from the different sources to present to the president, so that the president can make an informed decision. But that's not what Tulsi Gabbard's doing. She's under the control of the White House, so she can't be objective. So she's obfuscating. Her job now is to obfuscate real intelligence and flood the zone with Trump with bad intelligence. And Trump is proven to basically believe anything that's laid out on his desk. You could say pictures of dead ducks in Salisbury, a Novichok attack, and Trump will say, they'll say, Mr. President, this is a chemical weapons attack in England with Novichok. And, oh, that's very bad. That's very bad. What should we do? Well, we recommend that you expel all the Russian diplomats and let's ramp up the Ukraine war. Okay, that sounds good to me. Like he will do anything. If he's so easy to manipulate because he's functionally illiterate, he doesn't read. He can read, but he chooses not to read. He relies on whatever people are whispering in his ear in this sort of corrupt coterie of grifters and neocons and Israeli operatives that basically have him cocooned, this president. So it's hopeless. So they could tell him that, like, literally, Martians are, launching green cheese missiles at the U.S. We need to attack the moon. We need to do it quick. Otherwise, Martian terrorists are going to wipe us out. He will launch a nuclear attack against the moon. If he has enough people around him, Stephen Miller and everybody else, and all the other glad-handers, that he'll believe anything. So he believed that Iran was going to somehow do some surprise attack against the entire region. Imminent threat. Turns out that's not true. In fact, the U.S. intelligence assessments say, when you actually look at them, they say that's not the case. But that's not what was put on the president's desk. And then Tulsi Gabbard will come around and tweet out like she did today. She'll say that the president deemed it to be a credible threat. Therefore, I'm loyal. I work for the president. And Iran is a terrorist state and blah, blah, blah. Tulsi Gabbard is just another propaganda mouthpiece, another fake political construct a great American political fraud who pretended to be anti-war for years in order to get a grassroots support base, which Donald Trump saw that support base. He says, we'll have that. We're going to add that to the MAGA mosaic, the MAGA coalition. That's all he did. And by doing that, he managed to get Tulsi Gabbard helped Donald Trump to capture enough independent votes, populist anti-war votes, very, very difficult to get, but it's crucial in terms of swinging an election. She helped him, she delivered that for Trump. But the quid pro quo was by doing that, she had to basically jettison and let go of all her sort of anti-war positions. And now she's become a neocon. So a very amazing facelift to go from Democrat anti-war to neocon,
Just
rabid,
amazing.
rabid Zionist, anti-Muslim to the hilt.
Yeah.
She after October 7th, she knows Tulsi Gabbard should know better than anybody. She went to Syria during the war. She knew that the U.S. was trafficking billions of dollars of weapons into the hands of Al Qaeda affiliates, ISIS affiliates, to destabilize and wreck the country. And Israel was also involved. And she knew all this. She even tabled legislation: stop funding or stop arming terrorists. That was her bill. Okay, so she knew all of these groups, and she knew all this. She let it all go, and she knew that that Shiites weren't part of this Wahhabi Sunni terrorist conclave. She knew that. She knew that Qasem Soleimani was fighting ISIS and al-Nusra on the ground in Syria. She knew that the Hashid were fighting ISIS in Iraq. She knew Hezbollah were fighting and dying against Nusra, against ISIS. Yet she turns around now and calls Iran a terrorist state. Iran is not a terrorist state. They're not even 1% a terrorist state. The biggest terrorists in the world right now, if you want to call governments, who's the government? Which governments are carpet bombing densely populated civilian areas, threatening populations with expulsion if they don't leave, ethnic cleansing, genocide, kidnapping heads of state, stealing people's oil and resources, hijacking their oil tankers and bragging about it to the world media? Who's the terrorists? The U.S. and Israel are the biggest terrorist states on the planet right now. Everybody knows it. And Tulsi Gabbard's saying Iran is this terrorist state. They fought all the U.S.-backed and U.S.-armed terrorists that infested Iraq and Syria and carried out terrorist attacks in other places. And the MEK, another terrorist organization backed by the CIA, Iran fought all of them. And someone like Tulsi, who actually knows this, knows the truth, she's turned around and gone the full Israeli neocon party line, the John Bolton line. Iran is an evil terrorist, leading state sponsor of terror in the world. A complete fabricated talking point, one used to justify the illegal war of aggression that the United States and Israel are currently waging against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The whole thing is a fraud. And people like Tulsi, Trump, and all these other people that leveraged the anti-war, she said, Tulsi, the last thing I'll say, Nima, because this is just unbelievable what's going on in America. Tulsi Gabbard said in her tweet, she said, Donald Trump won an overwhelming electoral victory. Like, basically, she's insinuating that he has a mandate to carry out his foreign policy. She's lying. Donald Trump won because he ran on an anti-war platform, saying that he was going to stop regime change wars. She chimed in on the same exact campaign platform. That was the biggest plank, one of the biggest planks in the entire platform. That's what he ran. That's why he got the margin he got. So it's very disingenuous of her to turn around 18 months later and use the electoral mandate to launch an undeclared illegal regime change war of aggression, illegal by the U.S. Constitution standards and internationally as well. It's unbelievable, this type of gymnastics move that she is attempting to do. for clearly like completely in the tank for Israel and for the neocons that are driving Trump on this. So it's a lie. It's disingenuous. It's also stabbing the American people in the back, and definitely stabbing everybody who voted for Trump on that basis. The actual original MAGA movement, they've just thrown them right under the bus. And why? For promises of fame and fortune in the next election cycle in 2028. They've all been promised a seat at the table. Tulsi's been promised a ride on the ticket. As probably most likely, my understanding is to be a vice presidential candidate in the next presidential election cycle. So, but she's not the only one that's been promised that. They've promised that to probably about a half a dozen other people. That's how politics works. That's what the Israeli lobby does with their power and influence, with their money. They're able to have those conversations off stage with people like Gabbard or people like Rubio or who else. I mean, it's just, and if you actually looked and see who's been promised what, there's not enough available seats on the next electoral train for the amount of people that have been promised seats on that train. Tulsi's just another one, another malleable, fluid politician that will change and shapeshift and change whatever. J.D. Vance is another one. He will change and shapeshift whichever way the political train is going in order to keep and retain power. He will change and shift accordingly. So these are just empty vessels, these people, and they move according to power. And where the oligarchs and international, the titans of industry, the Israeli mafia, whatever direction they want these American politicians to go, they will go. They will go. And they promise, oh, you'll be able to do a lot of good if you stay in power. Tulsi's diehard fans, which there are not many left, they're saying, no, she shouldn't resign. It'd be better if she stays in government. Be better if she stays in government because she can change things from the inside. How's that change from the inside going right now? Not very good. She's been co-opted. She's been co-opted by the war machine. She's now part of the war machine. She's now the biggest advocate for war. And that's why they selected her. They knew if they could take her and transform her into a lethal weapon on the part of this international criminal cartel, that they will have achieved a massive victory. They eliminated any potential future opposition there in Tulsi Gabbard as an anti-war Democrat or whatever. They got rid of her. She's now on their team. And this is how it goes. This is the same with all of these sort of people that they select on that basis. If they can turn them, then they become they become co-opted, and then they become basically, Tulsi is advocating for war. She's playing a pivotal role in pushing us to World War III now. That's a huge change, 180 degrees from where she was 2-3 years ago. And many of us are now asking, was she ever sincere about her anti-war views, or was that just a game that was being played to get from one stepping stone to the next? I think that's a legitimate question at this point, but she has big political aspirations for 2028, and that probably explains a lot about what she's doing right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Yeah, thanks, Nima. It's very difficult. These are very difficult times for the world, especially for people in Iran, people in West Asia, and it's also going to be increasingly difficult for people in America if they allow their leadership to take them down this reckless path. That's my firm belief, and I'm not alone in that belief either. So all we can do at this point, Nima, is try to raise the issues as honest as we can, and pray at this point.
Exactly. See you soon.
Yep. See you soon. Thanks.